Have you ever wondered why people say don't focus on learning grammar concepts, it's only going to confuse you? Or perhaps the people that say, oh, don't focus on word order in a sentence in Spanish. Well, what if I told you that knowing Spanish grammar could actually speed up your understanding and processing of the language? Let's explore how learning indirect object pronouns in Spanish can be the key to sounding more natural. So in this video, I'm going to reveal how anyone learning Spanish at any level will easily master this concept on indirect objects. We're also going to look at how to answer two simple questions that will determine the right indirect combination to use every time in conversations. And I'm going to give you examples of how to figure out when to use the correct indirect object in a statement or question. We also have Perfect Power Tip to help boost your knowledge with indirect objects. But first, let me show you what would happen when I didn't fully understand the importance of using indirect objects in Spanish. By showing you my mistakes, hopefully it will help you to avoid making the same ones or some that are very similar. I was notorious for saying things like, ella da la comida a él, or la mamá de Alicia prepara un bizcocho a sus hijos. And most people would say, oh, Profe, that sounds perfect. I totally understand what you're saying. It sounds fine or it looks fine. Well, it's minor in appearance, but it's important to know that constructing your sentences like those tend to be less common or less natural in the normal flow of a conversation. They can even come off as, super formal or even emphatic in speech. However, the key to this whole thing about indirect objects is knowing and remembering the correct words to use in a conversation to not only make sense to the person that we're speaking with, but to also make our statements sound more natural in Espanol. The first time I heard the words indirect object, I was a sophomore in high school sitting in a Spanish 2 class. As the teacher was reading from the textbook, I quickly figured out two important things. Number one, if I wasn't confused before, I was most definitely confused now about indirect objects because it wasn't explained, it was just read. And number two, in order for me to completely understand indirect objects, I would need to create a process to follow that would always help me understand the indirect object needed by me or being used in a conversation by another person. So the most important thing for you to understand right now is how do I start the process of identifying an indirect object in a statement that I want to make or something that's being said to me. First and foremost, you have to know one super important word before we proceed, which is the word a. In Spanish, the preposition a is often used to highlight who is receiving the object based upon the action of the verb. This is what we call the indirect object. Think of it as putting a spotlight on the person affected by the action in a statement. But this next statement is crucial for you to understand. The a personal doesn't have a direct English translation here. It's just part of how Spanish shows you who is on the receiving end of the action. So for today's examples, we're going to focus on indirect objects from a third person singular and plural perspective. When we're talking about someone or the action that's being received is going to be another person, right? But my question to you is this. ¿Has visto estas palabras? Have you seen the following words? We're talking about él, ella, usted, ellos, ellas, ustedes, and then of course names, John, Jack, Judy, Jill, whoever, right? That's what we want to make sure you understand first and foremost. And so what do we mean? ¿Qué es la palabra él, right? Él, he. Ella, she, usted, you formal, talking to someone older, someone you don't know, somebody you're meeting for the first time, somebody you want to show respect to, right? Ellos, ellas, they, ustedes, you all or y'all, right? And then names, people that we just talked about. Those are going to be the crucial things that you have to understand going into third person singular and third person plural indirect objects. Now, what we're going to do is simply take these personal pronouns or these subject pronouns and combine it with what we just talked about with la palabra a, the preposition a personal. We're going to combine those together. So take a look at this. Ahora tenemos a él, which means to or for him. A ella, to or for her. A usted, to or for you. Hopefully this is putting a pattern into your mind and understanding what we're talking about here. A ellos, a ellas, to or for them. A ustedes, to or for y'all or you all. a, and then plus a name or names, which would be to or for a person or for people. So as we continue with this process, you're going to be able to understand how the picture is coming together utilizing indirect objects. So next we must understand the terms indirect and object. Okay, so let's break that down. Indirect means not directly benefiting from the action in the statement. The object usually refers to the person indirectly benefiting from the action in the statement.
Wait, first of all, you're not going to speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
So let's take a look at an indirect object in action. And full disclaimer here, I am purposely leaving out a word in this statement so that you can focus your attention solely on indirect objects. You know, a él, a ella, a usted, a ustedes, a ellos, those words that we just talked about, that's what I want you to focus on here. So here's our example from earlier. Ella da la comida a él. And we put ella in brackets. And because why? That is the subject. That is the doer in this statement. So it doesn't really matter about that. We know the doer of the action is ella, she. And la acción es da, which means gives in English. That is our action. So our question becomes, who is receiving la comida, right? Which is food, right? So we know that she, ella, is giving the food. Who is receiving the food? So based on our statement right here, ella da la comida a él, he. Who is receiving the food? Him. So now our statement, ella da la comida a él, she gives the food to him. So this may be a particular question for you. How do I know if I'm using the right indirect object? And notice that IDO stands for indirect object. Now we want to make sure you have the correct word chosen by asking two questions. And one of these two questions are going to point you in the direction of finding out if you are using the correct indirect object. This is similar to how we used to check if our answer was right when doing addition and subtraction equations in math. These two questions are always going to give you the correct indirect object in a statement or in a question. Those two questions are to whom or for whom. And I even like to put in the little hand signal that makes it make sense for everybody. To whom or for whom. Okay, entonces vamos a usar los ejemplos de antes. So we're going to use the examples from before. So our first example, el primer ejemplo, ella da la comida a él. Let's apply the two questions, to whom or for whom, to point us in the right direction of finding our indirect object in a statement. So ella da la comida a él. To whom or for whom is the food given? We know that the food is given to him. Let's look at the next one. El segundo ejemplo. La mamá de Alicia prepara un bizcocho para sus hijos. Alicia's mother prepares a cake for her kids. To whom or for whom is a cake being prepared? It's for her kids. So notice right there, that's how we get our indirect objects, simply by asking those two pertinent questions, to whom or for whom. So before we land this plane, I want to make sure that you have this down 100%. So we're going to look at a few examples to test your knowledge on indirect objects. And also don't forget to stick around after the example for Prophase Power Tip. A propósito, by the way, let me know in the comments if you understand what an indirect object is and that you know the three-step process to find an indirect object when you're listening, and I'll definitely respond back. You deserve that much. Okay, aquí tenemos ejemplo número uno. La chica no dijo la verdad a la policía. La chica no dijo la verdad a la policía. Now, if you don't know what this sentence means, it simply says the girl didn't tell the truth to the police. We're going to ask those two questions, right? To whom or for whom is the truth not told? And if we answer that, it would be a la policía. And if you've gained value from this video today, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you can get all the tips, the strategies, and easy to follow lessons. Okay, so let's get back to it. Aquí tenemos ejemplo número 2. La profesora da los libros a los estudiantes para completar la tarea de hoy. So the teacher gives the books, okay? To whom or for whom are the books? Los estudiantes. Correcto, muy bien. right? So we asked our question, to whom or for whom are these books being given? Entonces, ¿cómo te fue? How did it go for you? Let me know in the comment section below how this actually went for you when it came to understanding indirect objects. And as promised, I'd like to leave you with Profe's power tip. What's the quickest way to identify an indirect object? The indirect object will always follow the action. Número dos, the indirect object will always follow the word a. I know. But the thing is this, everything that I've told you up until this point is completely useless. Not knowing how to incorporate indirect object pronouns is the key piece that's keeping you from sounding more natural, more fluid in your conversations in Espanol. So watch this video right here, teach you how to combine indirect objects and indirect object pronouns in your statements, and I'll see you over there.